Jason Princenthal is the owner of AirCare Renovation Science. Restoration Science. They are a mold remediation. He's like your basic air guru, so to speak. He's been doing it for many, many years, and he has graciously volunteered to educate us on this hot topic. Jason?
Thank you.
And his lovely assistant, Lindsay, who is also his daughter, and also works for the company.
Is there a clicker, or I'll just let you know. Okay. Is this work good?
Oh, we did. Yeah.
Should be on.
Hello? Testing. Okay. Aloha. My name is Jason Princenthal, as Dennis said. I'm the president and founder of a firm here called AirCare Environmental Services, which we have two divisions, AirCare Hawaii and Restoration Science, which basically deals in indoor air quality and building science related services. We're a firm that basically comes in and finds solutions and deals with the problems. Our topic today is Legionella, and although I'm more or less an air guy, my background is microbiology. And as far as Legionella is concerned, I look at Legionnaires or Legionella as probably one of the biggest areas that really propelled my industry and field back in 1976 when I was a child going to college. I grew up here in Hawaii, so I went to Penn State University when I went to college, and at that time, the Legionnaires issue had popped out. Okay. Now, first of all, I want to clear things up. I'm none of these guys here. Now, I've been accused of being one of these three people, and I'm not. So I just want to clear that up. Like I said, this is who I am, and I usually tell people I'm a really fun guy, which is kind of a joke in the mold business. So if I can have the next slide, please. I just did that on purpose for you. Okay, so does everybody know what Legionella is at all? Legionella is a bacteria. So, and it's like I said, it kind of became a famous issue back in 1976 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, where at the time American Legion people were meeting. And this spawned the name for this particular bacteria and disease as Legionnaires' disease. It's a naturally occurring bacteria, so it's actually in our environment. So it's nothing that spawns because of some morphing in the environmental world. It actually is part of our environment, just like molds and other types of bacteria. It's found in most water systems, which is why we're really talking here, because a lot of the problems, in fact, as Dennis said, there's been a lot of focus again on this. It happens all the time. What made it really a big issue back in 1976 is they weren't sure what it was, because the symptoms are very similar to flu-like symptoms and pneumonia. So it's often is in most of our main water systems, and it easily colonizes in water systems, both hot and cold. Next slide, please. The optimum temperature for this bacteria is these ranges, which is about 68 to 113 degrees. I'd probably push that up to 120 degrees if you want to know the truth. It's a very resilient bacteria, and it can live quite well in water systems, systems that maybe you might not even think about, because a lot of this is a focus on chillers and cooling systems. However, just in water features, water fountains, shower heads, it's been found growing in these particular areas. Next slide, please. The route of infection is inhaling the organism, just very similar to viruses or cold-like virus situations where we, just like when somebody sneezes and we contract the disease or flus this way, it needs atomized or water droplet particles, which are usually coming from the source like a chiller or the old swamp pump chillers on rooftops, which is what actually happened at the Bellevue Stratford that caused a lot of the Legionella problems. It can be contracted even by choking on water, but it's not a human-borne disease. In other words, if somebody has Legionella, you can't contract it from another person. Statistically, the most susceptible people are the 50 to 70-year-olds and immunosuppressed people. This is why hospitals in particular are really focused on maintaining and controlling Legionella in their systems because of just the population within hospitals, which makes it a very susceptible population that can contract Legionella. It's males mostly, although females have contracted Legionella, and usually tends to hit smokers too. Very similar to asbestos, which are similar to, although you can stretch the ages a little bit younger with asbestos. Males and smokers are generally people who get aspergillosis usually. Next slide. Big risks, of course. There's been a lot of news media all throughout, not just the United States, but actually throughout the world. Australia and United Kingdom are very aggressive in the focus of these particular issues. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of these areas are totally enclosed. There was a Legionella outbreak at the Lexor in Vegas, which I can't recall when that happened. I think that was just recently, where they closed down the entire hotel and had to provide thorough remedial services, which is essentially using biocides and cleaners. And within our water systems, that's how we control Legionella. You know, not only with temperature, but with chemical treatments, which is why monitoring and making sure that these particular things are in check, because this is how we'll be preventing Legionella. Next slide. These are some fast facts about Legionella. Like I was telling you, the disease, or Legionnaires disease as it was called, and that was because of the American Legion people in Philadelphia, so they dubbed it Legionnaires disease, is very similar to pneumonia, Pontiac fever. It's caused by waterborne gram-negative bacteria. The bacterium was named in 1976. If you see 147 and 29, 147 people contracted the disease, 29 people died. And that's why it became such a big issue. Now, most of these people were elderly in that susceptible range. I don't know if they all smoked or not, but it's, again, it usually attacks weaker systems, immunosuppressed. A lot of people come in contact with Legionella and don't have a problem. So it's just one of those things that it focuses and deals with a certain select population. Doesn't mean that younger people can get it too. If you're sick, or you got plumbers, or you or engineers who might be under the weather, they're susceptible too if there's a situation where Legionella exists in say a system as you're maintaining it. The estimated amount of people that are hospitalized, I know that's a widespread, 8 to 18,000. And I think the reason for that is there's a lot of cases that probably go unknown because people have passed on by pneumonia or were diagnosed with a disease that might have been very similar to Legionella, but they didn't go the step further to actually know if it was Legionnaire's disease or not. Outbreaks of Legionella still exist today, as you're aware, and a lot of it's generally caused by contaminated cooling towers or water features. Next. These are some of the areas that Legionnaire's disease, these are some of the symptoms that, that people would feel initially from being contracting Legionella or Legionnaire's disease. Very similar to flus, colds, pneumonia, and this is why it went undetected back in 1976 when that big outbreak occurred. It's potentially fatal from about 5 to 30%. With a fatality rate. Incubation period is 2 to 10 days after contracting the bacteria. Typically it could be 3 or more days as well. And there's Legionella pneumophilia, which is actually the main disease that most, I would say 90% of all Legionella cases contract that particular species of Legionella. There is legislation worldwide from world organizations in Europe to ASHRAE, to CDC. ASHRAE has a 12-2000 guideline, which basically talks about preventing Legionella. I mean, we can't eliminate it. It's very similar to a lot of what I deal with is, you know, mold issues. I mean, a lot of people call me and want a mold-free building or environment. I say, well, that's kind of impossible unless you live in a bubble, because mold is everywhere. Spores aren't. And it's the same with bacteria. Bacteria is pretty much everywhere, but we need to be diligent about controlling it, particularly in areas where people might be dosed by it, because one of my favorite sayings is the dose makes the poison. And that comes with mold or bacteria. A little bit different with bacteria, because bacterial viruses, they're very aggressive pathogens. That's why they take hold and attack our immune systems. Where most issues with mold are not really disease-related issues. They're more allergic type reactions. Doesn't mean that we discard them. It just means that the microorganism works in different ways and affects people differently. Next. Risk assessments. These usually occur by either due diligence practices, where you have water treatment people like Nalco or Chem Systems generally will be taking care of these particular types of equipment like chillers. However, within properties, water features and things of that sort, which are also a risk, are usually in the hands of the engineering departments. And it's important that the engineering departments understand what risks there are, because in hotels, you know, you got hot tubs, you got water features, you got all these things that potentially could create a Legionella situation. That's why using heat and chemicals are so important to maintain those levels, so you keep these particular issues at bay. You need to basically, you know, assess the potential for your situation with Legionnaires or Legionella. You need to also identify who is at risk, meaning employees or guests. I mean, we're usually focused on guests in the hotel, but staff are equally at risk too, particularly since they're the ones that are actually in there on a constant basis, either maintaining it or within these environments that that exposure could be imminent. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. Typical systems at risk, like I was saying, cooling towers, domestic hot, cold water systems. So it doesn't necessarily need to be hot water. Cold water systems are also at risk. Equipment that produces any type of droplets, and you've probably seen this in Las Vegas and other hot areas where they have these misting machines. In drier environments like Vegas or Phoenix or any of those less humid environments, they tend to use humidifiers instead of dehumidifiers like we tend to use out here to dry out the air. They're actually adding moisture to the air, and if those systems aren't maintained, they can certainly be a surrogate for producing the bacteria for exposure. Even the portable air conditioning systems that we tend to like to use, these rollabout cool systems, they collect water. So, you know, water really is the main catalyst for any microorganism, whether it's mold or bacteria, and that's the situation that we need to control. Shower heads, areas that aren't being used on a frequent basis, even fire sprinkler systems. I don't know if you've ever had one of those go off. That sits, it's stagnant, and the stagnation of water is really the big concern with respect to Legionella, is that water stagnates, and that's where you will tend to have that right environment, I guess, for bacteria to exist. Just like anything else, you need nutrient too, and the nutrient is usually within the sediment of the line, within the fire sprinkler systems. That's why when they go off, they're filthy and smelly. I normally suggest that people wear respirators when they get into those situations because of that particular issue. Go to the next slide. Examples, these are more examples of sources, and this blends out into more other areas besides hotels. But again, it's all about water. It's water tanks, baths, spray tips, rarely used equipment. In dentist offices, they have to be concerned, obviously, and this is why disinfection and protocols of that matter are very important, not only for human-borne issues that they're trying to control, but other exterior environmental issues such as Legionella. Go to the next one. Controlling Legionella. It's like pretty much anything else. It's, you know, temperature monitoring is important, or chemical monitoring. The use of biocides, chlorines, are all there for that reason of not only keeping the systems clean, but also minimizing microbial growth from developing in there. And the biggest concern is not so much fungal issues, although algae can build up. We get more into the bacterial world, which is more hazard to most human beings, particularly with the diseases and viruses that they can cause. These are just some of the, I won't go through all this, you can read through this, but it has a lot to do with flushing, maintaining. I'm assuming that there's a lot of standard of care practices that are already existing in a lot of the hotels that we work in. Treatment and remedial options. Say, for instance, you had a suspect issue with Legionella. What do you do about it? You know, we go back to the Lexor. I mean, they closed down the entire hotel. Now, you got to understand, a lot of that was due to uncertainty of where that particular Legionella. Well, they knew it came from water features. They just didn't know how extensive it could be. It could have come from the actual main water supply systems. I don't know the total facts with that situation, but what they basically did, very, very similar to what cruise ships do with norovirus, is they go in and basically decontaminate and clean up everything. Now, with respect to Legionella in particular, again, anything over 140 degrees will kill this particular bacteria, so temperature can be used to either control or eliminate the risk. Adding disinfectants, making sure that, like I was saying, all the systems are running properly, that your systems are being treated properly with the proper chemicals. Flushing systems out is also an important feature to get that stagnated water out of those systems, particularly if you have dead plumbing areas or even fire sprinkler systems. I think they recommend to at least test and discharge. The problem is that those systems heat up. So I think with respect to what you folks do, I think fire suppression systems could be up there as far as a big risk for contracting Legionella, particularly if one of you are sick or immunosuppressed. Again, that's the population that this particular disease attacks. And with that, kind of cut it a little bit of a short educational thing. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has relating to Legionella and Legionnaire's disease.
Fire suppression systems, you mentioned about it. That's a huge risk because, how do you routinely flush it, maintain it, prevent any type of...
Well, maybe I shouldn't have put questions and answers. I don't know that question. I mean, I'm not an expert at fire suppression systems. What I would probably avert to is, I'm assuming that the manufacturers of these particular systems have their own procedures and protocol. It might not be for Legionella in particular. It's more probably a flush and clean type of procedure. So I mean, that would probably be the thing to follow. And I'm not certainly suggesting that you need to be freaked out about this. Like I said, I mean, this is about awareness. It's about understanding that stagnated water has the potential of having a bacteria that can be very harmful and can be fatal to a certain type of population. It's real important that if somebody feels as though that they've contracted something or are starting to get sick, that they go see a doctor, because the disease is very treatable. It's antibiotics, basically, and certain types of antibiotics. But and now doctors are more akamai about checking for Legionella, depending on the particular situation at hand. But fire suppression systems are probably one of the things that sit for the longest period of time that I can think of in a hotel.
Years.
How long?
Years and years.
Years and years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I don't know how practical it is. I don't know how practical it is to actually drain and refill one of these systems. I mean, it must be a pain. Yeah, okay. Well, just know that if they leak, there's a potential exposure. Any other question? Yes, sir.
The flu vaccination help to prevent?
No, there's no, this isn't a flu, it's not like emphysema. It's like emphysema where the symptoms are similar, but those vaccines are, I mean, they're basically dosing you with low levels of that particular disease or virus to build up your immune system. That's generally how vaccines work. In this case, there really isn't a specific vaccine for Legionella. It's more of a treatment. So in other words, keeping healthy and not smoking and not working in these environments when you're sick or have the flu would probably be a good recommendation, because having the flu and then being exposed to Legionella is where the danger lies, when your systems are immunosuppressed. That's why hospitals get so freaked out about aspergillus, fungus. They're, going back to my world, which is more mold. Hospitals are very concerned about air systems and things of that sort. I've dealt with a couple hospitals here years ago that had some fatalities due to aspergillosis, and it was linked to air systems, breathing systems that weren't cleaned properly. Now, it doesn't really tie into Legionella, other than the fact that the mechanism was very similar, inhale, and that's usually how you contract it, by inhaling. It gets lodged into your lungs and then creates havoc from that point on.
You know that Luxor Hotel?
Yeah.
Luxor Hotel?
Yes.
Did anybody die?
I don't think so. I think there were just a lot of sick people. People do die from this, but it's usually people who don't get the proper treatment right away, or goes misdiagnosed by a medical professional. Usually the cases come, they're treatable. It's not a very pleasant experience. Not that I've had it, but just by reading all the data and understanding, I mean, it's like pneumonia, which is also can be very fatal to certain people too. Yes, sir.
So we have a chemical treatment program for our HVAC, but in the guest rooms, you have all these fan coils in the guest rooms.
Right.
Just, quarterly go through, we change the filters and so on and so forth. We have a biocide tablets. Is that enough, or is it?
I've never really seen where Legionella has been found in an air fan coil system because it's cold. Water moves, it doesn't stagnate unless your drains are clogged. Biocide treatment certainly is a plus, more from the algae and biofilm that builds up in the fan coil systems. But even with molds, when I do sampling for guest rooms and mold, for mold issues, or I'm a practical guy. Mold is pretty obvious to me. I don't need to test usually unless it's a legal issue. I get asked that all the time. Well, we think we got mold, growing on the fiberglass insulation or something like that. I said, well, look at it. I mean, mold. At least for me, I mean, I know what mold looks like. I can almost tell you what species it is usually that grows in an air handler, or a fan coil, or in ductwork. Bacteria is somewhat of a concern in systems, but usually they're bacteria, gram-negative bacteria that are kind of natural to the environment anyhow, and I won't say they're supposed to be there, but with proper PM and cleaning, that's how we maintain them and maintain those levels. Just like I tell, because I deal with a lot of residential people who have allergy problems in their homes. And one of the first things I tell them is unless it's obvious, like a flood, see, floods create big problems because with bacteria and molds, because some idiot 50 years ago decided to build buildings out of paper. I mean, because a lot of people would ask me that. Well, how come we didn't have mold problems? I grew up in Kailua in an old wood structured home, single wall constructions. Those homes very rarely have problems, even when they flood, because the moisture, the materials are resistant to microorganisms growing on them. Where drywall, I mean, it can get moldy within 3 or 4 days. That's why responding and drying is so critical to maintain levels of those situations. But water is the key with respect to molds or bacteria and controlling them. Any other questions? Great. Well, I appreciate your time. Yeah, if anybody